if I told you there's a play about the succession drama over who gets to take over the Rogers Telecom empire, I don't know if you'd be that interested. But here's the thing. It is a play that I just saw last week, and truly, for me, like something that I've not stopped thinking about it since I've seen it. But one of the things that make this play stand out is that there are so many characters in it, and they're all played by the same actor, Tom Rooney. And I was so relieved to have Paul Wells and Ashley Murphy, and get to talk to them about the idea that, hey, suddenly you have one person playing, I don't know, I think it was like something like 20 roles in this play. How does someone like that pull it off? And they had some incredible insights into why that was necessary and the ways that it worked for them. I can't wait for you to hear this conversation because I'm obsessed with this play. So please listen to the conversation and then talk to me about it. Go see the play and then talk to me about it. Okay, get into it. Welcome to the show, both of you. How's it going?
Hey.
Hi.
How you doing?
It's nice to have you here. Paul, I'm going to start with you. And before we get into the play itself, as quickly as possible, if you don't mind, maybe we get into a bit of the backstory here, because like there's this deeply, highly publicized corporate drama that plays out in 2021 inside of one of the biggest boardrooms in the country. Who were the key players in this, and what was basically the fight?
It's a succession battle for control of one of Canada's largest communications companies. And it took place conveniently in the middle of the COVID lockdown when everybody had a lot of time to pay attention. And it was about Ted Rogers, who had founded the Rogers cable company and then eventually multimedia communications empire, had passed away. There had been a couple of short-lived CEOs who were brought in to run the company and didn't really work out for various reasons. And it became very clear, comically clear, that what was happening was a power struggle between his son, Edward Rogers, and Edward Rogers' sisters for control of the company. And this played out extraordinarily publicly, largely in the pages of the Globe, but also the Star and the National Post had their best reporters on it. And the protagonists were very open about what they were doing, including one of the Rogers sisters was tweeting about it as it was happening. And so it's a power struggle of the sort that Canadian business is usually far too polite to let us see. And this time, the masks were off.
Just very quickly at the very start there, you mentioned that it was a succession battle. The literal show Succession, HBO Succession, does play a role into this, in that after one of the most significant moves of all of this, what you end up getting is this like little video. It's a cameo video from Brian Cox from Succession. So Suzanne Rogers, who's Ed Rogers' wife, gets the actor Brian Cox to send her husband a video congratulating him on taking control of the company after ousting the CEO, Joe Natale. And I just want to play that clip really quickly.
Edward, this is from Suzanne. Congratulations on your real-life succession at Rogers Communications. And also having Joe Natale to fuck the fuck off. Well done, Edward. Congratulations.
I gotta tell you, that clip actually plays in the play. And when I went to the bathroom right afterwards, and I overheard these men talking, we were like, was that really real? Did that actually happen? I was like, I had the pleasure of being like, oh, that really did happen. Brian Cox really did make this video for the Rogers family. Actually, on his face, I think this Rogers saga doesn't immediately lend itself to going like, oh, someone should put that on a stage. And yet it works. It works really, really well. I want to talk about the adaptation of the book. I want to talk about the creative choices made here by Michael Healey, the playwright, also the director, Chris Abraham. What made it work for you?
Yeah, I mean, so something really interesting about this adaptation is that one person winds up playing all of these roles in the show.
Tom Rooney, the actor, plays all of them.
Yeah, it's just Tom Rooney. He's one of the best actors in Canada. And something that's really special about him is just his range. And I feel like people say that about a lot of actors. But within the past couple of years, I've seen him, play Vanya in Uncle Vanya and also a poodle in 15 Dogs. And I'd say that those performances were comparable in a lot of ways. They're both really strong. So to see him in this, where we're seeing him play with accents, we're seeing him really dive into the psychologies of these very different characters, from most of the members of the Rogers family to this competition commissioner who have really different values and moral imperatives. I'm not sure that another actor really could have been the one for this show.
Yeah.
And the way it's written, we wind up seeing him have conversations with himself multiple times. There's a sequence where he has like a 20-minute conversation with himself as like 8 different people on a Zoom call. call. So, like, in the adaptation, you see this thing that probably could be pretty boring if you were just to sort of narrate it as a straight up play. But no, it's one dude telling the story kind of all at once. It's crazy in a really fun way.
I just want to hold on that for a moment because that scene is maybe one of the most difficult things I've seen anybody pull off on stage ever. Like it's just one continuous Zoom call where so many members of the Rogers family are on the Zoom call. And the way that Tom Rooney holds his body on stage, I go, oh, that's a different person now, and he's interrupting himself mid-conversation to yell at himself. And on paper, this should not work, but there's something about Tom Rooney and that performance that just makes it unbelievable, right? Like
it's wild. And I mean, Crow's Theatre as well, I'll say, has sort of developed a reputation for being really inventive with tech and using tech in their shows in a way that I think is pretty actor friendly, or at least it seems to be. Because in this Zoom call sequence, we're not only seeing Tom have like a pretty fraught emotional conversation with these various family members. This, I would say, is the climax of the play where we're really seeing the Rogers family implode over this terrible Zoom call. But then he's jumping between Zoom frames. We're seeing a literal kind of 3D Zoom room develop around him, which is terrifying in most ways. But it's done so seamlessly that it really shows off not only his acting chops, but also the sort of versatility of this tech that Crows is using to suggest this digital world that we all kind of lived in during the pandemic.
Paul, let me ask you the same question. Did this idea of like Tom Rooney being on stage and just completely alone but pulling off all these characters, did that work for you? Did you connect with that?
Absolutely. It's a virtuoso piece of comic acting. And Tom Rooney's got a lot of range, but one of the things he does well, as I was doing my research to write about it, I realized that I had written about him as Hamlet 20 years ago at the National Arts Center. And in the course of that play, Hamlet puts on an antic disposition. He pretends to be insane. And Rooney leaned heavily on that. It's a very comic portrayal of Hamlet. This is the only thing he's ever done that has more lines than Hamlet does in Hamlet. And if anything, it gives him more room. I found it sometimes, I would have appreciated maybe a week or two more rehearsal so that he could sort of calm down and center into the role. It sometimes is overwhelming how much acting you're seeing going on. But I think anyone else would simply have fallen apart or forgotten which role they were playing right now. And Tom Rooney does execute it sort of masterfully.
95 minutes, no intermission, is just Tom Rooney on stage doing all of this continuously. I want to play a clip actually about this very specific choice. But like this is Tom Power on Q. Michael Healey was on the show to talk to Tom Power about his thinking about, okay, you could cast a whole bunch of different people to play this in the play, but here's him talking about having one guy play all these different roles. Have a listen.
There's a theme of aloneness in the play. There are ideas about how the kind of particular feeling of aloneness that you feel when both of your parents pass away, the solitary dumbness you feel when you're in the marketplace and you're getting just screwed by a corporation somehow, like extra fees or the
$4 tomato.
The $4 tomato, the prices in the grocery store that are unrecognizable from. There's a kind of solitary feeling about that.
There's a moment in the play where Tom Rooney is looking at a tomato and sort of sharing with you, being like, "Oh, this is how dumb you feel when you're confronted with the reality that one company is structuring all the choices that you have." So when you hear that clip, Paul, what do you make of what Michael Healey was saying there?
It's one reason I'm grateful that Michael Healey's out there because, like the actor that he chose for this, he too has a lot of range and. He gets that even in farce and satire, there have to be moments of recognition and realization. And there are, for both of his sort of dueling main characters, Edward Rogers and Matthew Boswell, the competition commissioner, I will never get over the idea that I sat through a play twice in rehearsal and in performance about the competition commissioner. Each of them pauses to sort of come to ground on how horrible elements of this conflict are, and it makes the funny funnier because the drama is dramatic.
In just a moment ago, I'm going to come back to that idea of having a play, one of the key entry points of this play, be a competition commissioner, because that is actually very revealing in terms of just like how Michael Healey's thinking about this. But I want to sit for a moment in the family dynamics of the Rogers family as we're kind of introduced to them. So specifically, let's talk about Edward Rogers. The way that he's played, the way that he's presented in this play, the way that he speaks, the way that Tom Rooney speaks as a representation of Edward Rogers speaking is a bit stuttering, it's a bit sort of meandering, it's a bit not really sure where his sentences are going to land. Tell me about that, how you felt about that portrayal, Ashley. How did that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to your point about, maybe an extra week of rehearsal for Tom Rooney, I had a similar thought on opening night, but also so much of Edward Rogers's characterization in the show is that he searches for his words and he's mumbling and he's kind of a pain to listen to.
I couldn't tell whether that was a performance thing or that's just how Edward Rogers was supposed to be characterized. Yeah,
totally. And I think some of that absolutely is, more time would have been better and there would have been less of a question mark around that. But also I didn't mind it as much as I might in another piece of writing. Yeah. And I think something, Tom Rooney, he's not afraid to be really unlikable in these people that he is stepping into. A lot of this show is really unpleasant to watch because you're watching, like, obviously it's a play and obviously it's a comedy, but also these are representations of some of the people in Canada who control, as you said, like pretty much every choice we make or lack thereof. There aren't enough choices for us to be able to make. Yeah. So I think it's I had the same thought about Succession when that was on the air. It's so tricky to feel for these people when in real life they kind of suck so much in a lot of kind of meaningful ways.
I was going to say, like, that's one of the striking things about this play is because it spends a little bit of time telling you about some of the tragedy of Edward Rogers' life. Like,
absolutely.
The idea that, hey, he was at a boarding school a few blocks away from home for years and couldn't just kind of come home to his family, right? Like this idea of like, oh, he was looking and desperately looking for some approval, but he couldn't find it. Like that's the way that he's sort of portrayed in this play. When you see that relationship with his father, the relationship with his mother, and then you still have to land the plane and go, you still got to hold these people accountable for the choices that they make for this country. That's a delicate balance. That, like, Succession does that really well.
For sure.
Did that balance sort of get struck for you in this play?
Yeah, 100%. And I think with a story like this, it would be really easy to say like, oh, here we get to root for the bad guy or something. And it's not quite that. I think Michael Healey is the kind of writer that's not afraid to tell you, hey, there aren't necessarily bad guys, or if there are, there's a lot more layers than people might be willing to talk about because these are people with insane amounts of privilege and wealth. Yeah. So I think a combination of the writing, the direction, and then Tom Rooney's performance, you get those layers and they really chafe against each other. It's very hard one moment to be like, man, you had a terrible childhood and also, you make more money in 10 minutes than I'll make for the rest of my career. Like being able to hold both of those truths at the same time, I think is a show of a very thoughtful piece of theater, which is what I sort of walked away with.
Paul, the larger context here is that this is a play that is based on a book, right? It's based on a book by Globe and Mail reporter Alexander Pizzotsky. The book is brilliant. I read it earlier this year. What do you think the book offered that sort of helped stage this play and sort of make it come to life?
So that book is like if you were a chef and one of the country's best shoppers had gone to the grocery store and brought back everything you need to make a great meal. Yeah. But it's still in the packages. I actually interviewed Alex Pizzotsky for my old podcast about the book, and she is in a lot of ways, a kind of an old school Globe and Mail reporter and not an analyst. And she is a little leery of getting drawn into grand narratives because narratives are always simplifications. Yeah. And I tried to tug her into this family drama, and she was very much sticking with what had happened. But as I say, all of the ingredients are in the book. All of the best lines and moments in Healey's play, I think with very few exceptions, come straight out of the book. And there are things that happen in passing, but a keen eye will notice the thing like the boarding school being so close to home. You might not have thought about it twice if someone had mentioned it at a dinner party, but it becomes the part of the architecture of tragedy in the play.
Yeah, the one thing that I did pick up on is that as leery as Alex might be of grand narratives, she does start the book with the scene that actually I don't think they spend enough time on the play with, but the book starts with the scene of the Rogers, the Rogers girls are sort of gathered around their mom as she's dying, and Edward Rogers is trying to enter the room to say his goodbyes to his dying mother, and it's unclear who makes the call, but Edward Rogers is not allowed in to say his goodbyes. And she may well be sort of, hesitant to draw some of those sort of larger tragic, narratives of a life. But starting the book there does set you up for that feeling, don't you think, Paul?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And succession, I don't know if we're planning to get into this, but succession stories in business and in politics are a type. And it's very frequent that the founder puts their entire heart and soul and all of their personality into the structure, and then it kind of seems natural that somebody will take up the slack. But it's not just often; it's usually a challenge that's beyond anyone in the next generation. Mm-hmm. And they want to honor the patriarch. And they want to benefit from the leg up that they got. And I think of Al Gore Jr., Paul Martin Jr., Preston Manning and Ernest Manning, the Aspers. We've seen a lot of succession dramas, and they are kind of a type.
Yeah. I think the thing you just mentioned there, I was like, oh, and you mean like Logan Roy. Like that's where sort of my brain went. And also Logan Roy. Okay, I want to play another part of Michael Healey's interview on Q. This is where he talks about the moment he realized, oh, this story should become a play.
I only really felt it as a play on page 300. Matthew Boswell, the Competition Commissioner of Canada, shows up, and he's going to make it his mission to stop the Rogers-Shaw merger. Now, Canada has never fully stopped the merger of two corporations, so this guy is way out over his skis in terms of trying to do something, a hard thing, in the public interest that is kind of unprecedented, and it takes a toll on him. And I'm at page 300, and suddenly I'm like, yeah, that Rogers stuff is great, but here's a public servant who's attempting to do something hard, and now I'm interested.
Canada's Competition Bureau, Matthew Boswell, shows up in the book. He's, kind of a bit of an unsung hero in the story. In the play, you begin with him, Ashley. That's where you sort of begin the story. What do you make of Michael Healey's decision to say, you're going to meet him first? Actually, we're going to anchor the story around his trajectory.
Yeah, for sure. Michael Healey is really good at choosing these unlikely narrators to tell these very thick stories of how Canada works. I want to go back to the master plan for a second, which I think is one of my favorite pieces of theater of the last 5 years.
An adaptation of like a book about sidewalk labs sort of trying to, start a big project in Toronto and then it failing.
Yeah, it's that play winds up being about how, the city of Toronto works, how Google works, all these things that are, quite boring and dense on the surface, I think. And the way that Healey chose to tell that story was from the point of view of a single tree. And it turned out that this tree had been a point of contention with Toronto City Council because the owners of this house had wanted to build a hot tub and this tree was in the way. Sort of classic story of Toronto municipal bureaucracy, and ultimately a really funny entry point to that story and a unexpected one as well. So when I saw Rogers v. Rogers, I'm like, I wasn't super surprised that he had chosen someone who, on first glance might seem quite secondary to the story. Yeah. But I also think, there's so much happening in this story that the audience needs a narrator. Not everyone who is going to see this show will have read the book, will have read this story as it was happening in real time. Yeah. So I think having that sort of an anchor person who, Matthew Boswell in life, I think has that sort of arm's length distance from the story to be able to talk about what happened. And I think for a piece of theater, that makes all the sense in the world to sort of distill that into this narrator character too. Otherwise, I think it might feel like a bit of a circus. And I think having Boswell be the sort of centerpiece of it keeps it from feeling too untethered from itself.
I was going to say, Paul, you don't see a lot of plays about competition commissioners, and then there's a moment where the Matthew Boswell's character asks, hey, we're all familiar with the Competition Act of 1984, right? And then the audience is like, we sure aren't. What did you make of the decision to sort of make him one of the central storytellers in this play?
took me a while. I mean, I know Healey a little bit, and so like a year and a half ago, we were out walking his dog one day in Toronto, and he said he was going to make the competition commissioner the hero, and I'm like, well, fill your boots, buddy, but boy, you know. But it's a canny decision, because in real life, as in the play, these commissioners and officers of parliament, people like the Auditor General or the Official Languages Commissioner, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, are our advocates at court. They're the only people in the process whose only job is to think about the effect on us as citizens. And so, like, the rest of that Rogers story could have been a sort of a more traditional play where they were all talking to each other. But as soon as you put Boswell into it, it has to be one where at least he is talking to us and telling us why it matters to us. And so he becomes our sort of ambassador into this story.
Yeah, the idea of like him talking to us, that's one of the central things that you take away from this play. Because when you watch this play, there's a level of like, there is a story, but then there is the thing that it means to you as a Canadian, as a consumer. You're sitting there, hey, like all of this actually matters to you. And that's the same thing with the master plan. Like there's something about watching both of those plays and you're engaged as someone, you're like, hey, this is not neutral. This is actually like ends up shaping everything about how you live your life. So for you, what was it like, Aisling, as a Canadian, as a consumer, sitting there watching a play that is like, hey, these are the battles that are going on behind the scenes over, control for what happens to you as a consumer?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it would be really easy for these sorts of stories to feel really bleak. And, you leave the theater sort of dejected about the state of the world and the people who run it. For both Rogers v. Rogers and the master plan, that's not the case, because in both, they're sort of trying to make 2 points at once, right? It's like, yes, there's this other world of the elites and powerful people who shape the world. And yes, sometimes they do things that'll affect you. But, there's this story of how elites work and what they do. But then ultimately, and especially in Rogers v. Rogers, there's this parallel narrative that's much more personal and I think much more kind of down to earth and accessible as well, where it's like, yes, these things are happening in these upper echelons of society, but also you can't afford your phone bill. And this is a problem because you are staring at a tomato in the grocery store wondering why it's $4. And this is a problem because. And I thought this was true of the master plan as well. But, both of these plays, they managed to paint this sort of dual portrait of these opposite sides of the Canadian economy and culture. And ultimately, you wind up kind of at a middle place where you're able to digest both narratives and also understand the importance of both. And that's really hard. Again, these stories are so dense. And I think making them accessible, that's not like a quick
Making them not just accessible,
thing.
but also emotional.
Totally.
Like, accessible and also emotional at the same time. Paul, I'll give you the last word on this. What do you think a play like Rogers v. Rogers? Because at the end of the day, we're returning to a theatrical experience in a play. What do you think a play like this reveals about the institutions and the power structures within our country as you sort of like watch this play? Do you end up being like, oh, I should be more emotionally invested in a story like this because it does matter to me as a Canadian, as a consumer?
I am not aware of another playwright who's had a streak like Michael Healey has of writing about power in Canada as at the place where it happens. There's a lot of Canadian theater of power being inflicted on people, of people who feel like the system doesn't speak for them or to them, whether like Kevin Loring writing about Indigenous communities or Brad Fraser talking about sort of down and outers in Calgary. But Healey has decided that we can also talk about the places where power happens, where the options are vast and the clout is vast, but so is the pressure. And that's something I'm more used to seeing playwrights in London and New York writing about than Canadians. And he's sort of saying, we get to have our own power struggles too, and they're as valid as anything that Shakespeare put in Denmark or Venice.
I think like that's the thing that I'm excited about, the idea that like Canadian theater is willing to take this on right now. Aisling, about 30 seconds left here, but tell me about what this tells you about the willingness of Canadian theater to turn directly into where the tension is. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think we all know we're in this moment of renewed interest in Canadian stories, elbows up and all of that. So I'm excited to see what comes out of Canadian playwriting next from the precedent set by Rogers v. Rogers and the master plan. There's a bit of a formula there, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that formula both develops and complicates for future Canadian stories, because I think they're really important.
It's not accidental, I don't think, that when you sit down for Rogers v. Rogers and look at your program, the opening message says, we're doing more of these.
Totally.
What other books do you think we should adapt? Because actually, I do think there's a good wealth of books and stories that critique the corporate structures of this country, the governance structures of this country. Paul, I'm waiting for them to turn your book about the convoy into the next play. That's what I think. So I'm just a pitch, just a soft pitch here. But in the meantime, I got to let the two of you go. Thank you so much for your time. This has been wonderful. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ashley Murphy is a theater reporter for the Globe and Mail. Paul Wells is a journalist and author. You can find more of his work on his Substack. Rogers v. Rogers, by the way, is on until January 17th at the Coast Theatre in Toronto. And then it goes to Winnipeg from February 18th to March 14th at the Royal Manitoba Theatre Centre. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. And hey, we'll see you tomorrow.